Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Extending Your Home Lab to Include Cloud. My name is Carol Auth of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Ismael Valenzuela and Justin Henderson. Both are SANS certified instructors. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to turn the webcast over to Justin.
Thanks, Carol. So today is going to be the extension of our home lab. We've talked a lot, Ismael and I, about being an all-around defender. We've talked about doing a home lab with hardware that's laying around, cheap hardware, Intel nut kits, and Raspberry Pis, which, by the way, I've been playing a lot with Raspberry Pis. I almost feel like I can do another webcast just on those. I just didn't realize for 20 bucks how much stuff you could do with those things. So it is crazy. But today is the talk on, well, what about cloud? What about if I want to extend to enterprise scale cloud technologies, and how do I afford it? So for today, it's going to basically be Ismael and myself. Ismael, I'll let you introduce yourself first.
Thank you, Justin. And I'm so excited. Again, we're here again talking about labs and essentially like listening to the requests from the attendees. Like they keep saying, we want to talk more about this, more about that. So I think we're going to be here like doing these webinars for a long time, which is awesome. I'm down for it. Yeah, so my name is Ismael Valenzuela. I'm co-author of Security 530 together with Justin, and I've been teaching SANS for a while. I've been in security in about 20 years, and I'm really excited about this topic because I think it represents a significant change for a lot of us, that we may have been doing things a specific way, and now we're like, oh wow, what is that thing? Cloud, right? So we talked a lot about how to build your own labs, like in your basement with things you may have around you. This is a whole different thing, but hopefully you're going to learn a lot and you're going to like the material we have prepared for you. I'm also Senior Principal Engineer at McAfee, GSE, as Justin, but I'm not even going to say how many certificates I have because I know I can't compare to you, Justin. And I have to tell you something. I'm just here to listen about that flying baby thing. I've been told something about a flying baby, so I hope you talk about that, Justin.
Totally do the flying baby. Yeah. So Justin Henderson, that's me. I'm the resident geek in that the pandemic hit, and I know it's horrible, it's bad. If you or any of your loved ones have been affected, my apologies and my prayers go out to you. But one thing that was kind of eye-opening for me as to the level of geekiness is it didn't change anything for me. I'm still at home, I'm still goofing off. If you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I'm privileged to be able to work with folks like Ismael and really many of you who are probably listening, because you're my friends, you're the extension of my family, and I just love having this opportunity to do this. I do have 61 certs, but all that is, as far as relevance, is that I was able to social engineer my employer to pay for a lot of my training, which, by the way, is the next webcast in the series. It's all about social engineering your workplace to get you proper training or hardware or cloud licensing or whatever, because technically it is mutually beneficial, but you have to spin it that way, and we're going to try to show you how to do that, because Ismael and I have both done very well with that in our careers.
But don't tell your employers that we told you this. That's our secret.
Yeah. Yes. But with that, we're going to jump into this one on cloud. And as I promised to Ismael, the flying babies. What does cloud and babies have to do with each other? Well, if you believe in storks, then obviously that makes perfect sense. The stork comes out of the cloud. Okay, that's not what we're talking about. And we're not talking about the other real way that happens. What we're talking about is when we deal with the traditional like on-premise security model, to me it's a lot like I have kids. I have 3 kids and one of them is a newborn. And when you have a baby in the house that's precious to you, you care for it, it's your treasure, and you go around and you start putting like plastic covers on outlets and things because you don't want the baby to have access to that because it can hurt them, it can hurt your household. And so traditionally, we have next-gen firewalls, we have network security monitoring, we have, antivirus or EDR, or, allow application control suites and all of these purpose-built technologies, but then along comes the cloud. And the cloud changes the dynamic substantially, and to me, it's a lot like what I call the flying baby syndrome. Because the problem is, the baby now can fly, and so good luck trying to put plastic covers on everything. Because before it was always at ground level, and now they're everywhere, and it's hard to hold on to that baby. And what that kind of symbolizes to me is an enterprise environment where now shadow IT, organizations going out and getting their own cloud services, their own file sharing services, their own human resource app. Like all of a sudden the problem is that access is easy on because they're all flying babies. Now, I get that's an analogy. It's a weird analogy. I'm a big fan of weird analogies because I think they help communicate what we're dealing with. My personal favorite is still dogs vomiting and regurgitating it. If you've not heard that one, you need to listen to some other webcasts. But I hope that analogy kind of sticks because with cloud, we've got a little bit of everything. I always love looking at pictures of the cloud too, because by the way, this one to me looks like a fat Santa Claus surfing on the clouds. I don't know why, it just does. But we have, of course, hosting your virtual machines on someone else's hardware, which is infrastructure as a service. We have running your containers on someone else's hardware, which is kind of a subset, container as a service. And then we have all these various things. Software as a service to me is a huge differing cloud advantage because there's some really sophisticated software as a service suites, even as basic as like a Dropbox or Box or SharePoint, or where you're literally just paying to use the software and you don't care, you're not patching it, you're not, paying for the pen tests, you're not vuln scanning it, you're not provisioning any of it, you're a consumer. And then we have kind of different hybrids and platform and function as a service or serverless, which by the way still has servers, but you're running and paying for code execution, which is really cool. So ignore all that because you might already know that. What I want to do is talk through some really cool ways to get some massively enterprise-like capabilities for as cheap as possible. I am going to talk the talk in that I drink my own Kool-Aid here. I'm going to start off with predominantly Microsoft, and it's not that I'm saying Microsoft is better than other solutions. Like Ismael's on the call, and he's a McAfee, he works for McAfee. McAfee has commercialized versions of things I'm about to talk through. I'm just not aware of where they give you dev or test licenses, and maybe they do, and if so, those are alternatives, and you should look at them. CrowdStrike, or what I want to talk through here is when I have a large-scale enterprise, think big, think really big. Well, the challenges they face and where they look to the cloud are, well, I might want to have email in the cloud because I'm tired of dealing with backup tapes and doing operating system and software upgrades and clustering and high availability. Now let's just outsource that and do Google email for Gmail, or Microsoft Exchange, which is Outlook 365. They might say, you know what, we need an enterprise grade endpoint detect response suite. And there's a lot of solutions, and quite frankly, EDR is one of the technologies I love it. It actually is very practical, but it's expensive. But there are ways for you to get lower cost licenses when it's designed for dev and testing. And so I'm first going to call out Microsoft has this thing called Microsoft Visual Studio Professional Subscriptions. It is either $45 a month or $540 a year. And I understand $540 is not cheap, nor is $45 a month. You can technically do everything I'm about to talk to for free under trials, but I'm going to encourage you to consider doing something like this. Maybe if you don't want to do it with Microsoft, do it with something else. But here's the thing. If I do a free trial of a enterprise-like functionality, let's say I'm doing data loss prevention tools, I'm doing regex to find credit card numbers and social securities, just like you would in a big enterprise. You probably aren't going to finish playing with the technology within a month. And even if you did, it's dependent on so many other things that also would fall under a 30-day trial. What I want for you to is have a lab that you can pick up and put down and play with anytime throughout the year, that you don't have to constantly destroy and rebuild it from scratch, because then you're wasting time building something you already know how to do. I want you to go straight into the enterprise capabilities. So for me, this is something at $540 a year. I've paid personally many times. I've also had where organizations might pay for it out of the training budget. But if you're paying for it out of pocket, it's also something that I will put as a tax expense, because you'll get a little bit money towards your taxes at the end of the year. So here's kind of what it's going to give you, and this is a complete understatement. It'll give me access to all the Windows desktop and server licenses. So Windows 10 Enterprise to Server 2019 Enterprise or Data Center and below. It gives me a $50 monthly Azure credit. So wait a minute, you're spending $45 a month, but you get $50. Yes, I typically don't use that credit, just if I'm being honest, I don't. Usually when I'm doing infrastructure, for some reason I do it in Amazon instead of Microsoft. What I really want this for are the licenses, as well as the Azure DevOps, and most specifically, the E5 licenses. So Azure DevOps literally lets you build out CI, automatic development pipelines and integrations, kind of infrastructure as code that Ismael's going to show you on the Amazon side. But those E5 licenses, you get 25 user E5 licenses. That means you get SharePoint, DLP, you get Azure Active Directory, you get Identity Management, you get Intunes, you get Endpoint Manager, you get basically a whole mobile device management. You get all sorts of things that enterprises usually don't even have all of them, because they usually don't have like an E5 license because they can't afford it. Or because they're, you know, I want a little bit of Microsoft, a little bit of McAfee, a little bit of, and they don't want everything all in one license. They want to get a little bit from different companies. But from a lab, this lets you build out a full-fledged enterprise infrastructure, use them cloud only, or take these licenses and put them on your at-home physical hardware lab, but you're using the cloud for all the enterprise capabilities. So I'm going to walk through multiple of these, and I'll try not to get lost chatting it up too much. This slide, I'm just going to flash through this one. This is just kind of mapping, like if I had the $50 Azure credits per month, I could deploy virtual machines. I could deploy Kubernetes clusters. I could do special app services, which are, it's not like a web server, they're web apps, and they're very like movable and pipeline driven. It's kind of cool. And you could do serverless code. So if you want to play with any of those things, you can, because it would come with a credit towards that. What I'm going to spend most of is trying to get enterprise feature sets out of this E5 license. Now, again, E5 means you get Office, you get SharePoint, you get OneDrive, you get Microsoft Teams, you get Yammer, you get all these obscure Office applications. But what's the most important is you get all the back-end specialized policies, asset management components, and different aspects to control these more than, again, most organizations even can. So for example, my company, we use E5 licenses for things like email and file sharing, because we have access to sensitive privileged data that we need a data-centric control, meaning I don't really care where it's at. I need to make sure it's protected the same way. And so now I can set up things like conditional access rules on when, where, and what accesses the data. And then I can use things like Azure Information Protection, a commercial solution. On-prem, this would have been something like rights management or like DLP. And now I can say, oh, I see that you just saved a Excel, a Word document, and that contained intellectual property, that contained social security numbers, it contained whatever, and now it gets auto-classified as, you know, electronically protected healthcare information or intellectual property, and it's encrypted, and I can even share that to an external party that's not my organization, and I can still put controls on how and who and what can open those files. Once it's open, some of those are still being hard controlled. And so you get some of the sophisticated data-centric controls that we otherwise won't have. So it's a paid-for service, but it just happens to be included in these dev test licenses. If you're trying to figure out how to replicate asset management, well, then you get Endpoint Management. You get Endpoint Management and Intunes, which work hand in hand together. This would be like, I can actually push some group policies. It's not group policy. Let's be clear, it's not group policy. But we used to have group policy on-prem, but when you move to the cloud and you're doing things like Endpoint Management, they're trying to make it more modernized. So I can't do group policy, yet I can go in there and say, create me settings using the group policy administrative template settings for, and it actually is like the exact same thing as group policy, it's just not through a domain controller. But I can have compliance policies that say I need Microsoft Chrome or Firefox or Edge or this registry key, or, and it's not just limited to Windows, by the way. It's more than just Windows systems. It's just, obviously, it makes it a little bit easier for Windows. And I can push PowerShell scripts, I can install software, and it's got full reporting, it's got automatic deployment scripts and things like that. And it's kind of neat because now you're not paying substantial amounts of money, and yet you have an enterprise asset management system, which, again, this is stuff that's being used right now by larger organizations. Some of you probably would geek out more over Intunes. I'm a fan of Endpoint Manager because I feel like that's one of the, Endpoint Management is one of the most critical areas organizations struggle to properly apply security. Ismael and I have a habit of, when we talk about organizations, like, how quickly could you push out a registry key setting to all of your assets and get 100% application? A day, a week, a month, multiple months, a half a year, like, and usually, you know, folks, oh, we could do it in a day. And it's like, no, sit down. No, not going to happen. Either you're in a super small environment or you're lying to yourself, because asset management is so difficult. Machines are off, they're on, they throw errors like S-channel errors, which then breaks authentication to a domain controller, yet you can still log into them as a user. So they're your asset, but they're not really working properly. And well, that's why I like Endpoint Management. Now, Intune, the flip of this, is it's mobile device management. You know, iOS, Android, and a few other things in here where I can literally start to control, plus laptops, desktops, things like that as well. And I can put corporate policies, again, from a data-centric standpoint, over how corporate assets can be touched. So this would be stuff like, I use OneNote. Some of you, I just lost brownie points because you hate OneNote. Okay, that's fine. Don't judge. I love OneNote. I don't love OneNote. I use OneNote. So I use it personally, but I also use it corporately in my enterprise. And the difference is when I use it personally, like, it could be something as simple as like a shopping list. And no, I don't use it for a shopping list, but let's just say I'm using it for a shopping list. But in the corporate, we're literally like, the next big project that we're planning, here's the whiteboard session we're doing on it, we're drawing, we're taking notes, and it's like, it's part of intellectual property. We don't want it to be stolen. Yet, I want to access it on my tablet because I like drawing on my tablet more than I like it on my computer. Well, that's actually okay, because when I access OneNote for personal, it's actually like there's two different versions of OneNote installed, but it's the same application. And this is where one of them is the normal installed application, and one of them is like an encrypted container running that application. And there's policies to control printing and reading and copy and paste and taking screenshots, and then there's my personal one, which has none of those. So one, I can centrally manage as much as I want, and mobile device management is not easy to implement, whether it's a different commercial product or Intune, but there's tutorials and guides on how to implement this. So now I could have where when I go to open the OneNote file that's a corporate asset, it magically knows it. And now it requires, two-factor, maybe fingerprint, and you control it all. And that's part of what's going to be included within this license. So again, we're kind of moving towards full-on enterprise implementations. Could be you actually control and push software to mobile devices. Could be you set it up so that when they buy certain apps, it bills you or your fake corporate entity. Wow, this is cool. I just made it where my end users can buy a $5 app and I get billed for it, when really it's you. But the fact that you're able to set that up now, when you go to apply for a job or you go to implement it within the job you already have, you're a ninja. Literally, you're a ninja. Like, the number of people I know who can roll these things out and say, I've done that, are far and few between. And that's, again, this is why Ismael and I am proud to be here to be able to share some of this. It's not rocket scientist. It's not something that is so insanely difficult. If you're taking the time to watch this today, you're already halfway there, because you're showing initiative. And if you start to do these things, you're building experience, and that's a huge win. If you have a lab at home, which highly recommend. For me, you should always have a domain controller, maybe some fake accounts. There are tools that will generate fake OUs and accounts so that you can emulate like group policies and things like that, like you would a corporate. But if you have that in your lab, then what you should do is try to extend that to the cloud, because now what you're dealing with is single sign-on, SAML authentication, federation. Notice I'm using a bunch of cool sounding words. I work in the marketing department. No, okay, I'm sorry. That was a little below the belt. But I can now federate using Azure AD Connect with my test licenses, those 25 E5 licenses. I can connect them so that when I authenticate to various applications and SharePoint and email and even non-Microsoft applications, that all of a sudden it integrates with either accounts you created in Azure Active Directory or your on-premise Active Directory, because they're kind of one and the same at this point. And so I could go over to, say, like a Dropbox and be like, I need to be able to log on with my Microsoft Enterprise account, and it will SAML off over to Azure Active Directory, and you have access. You can now implement cloud authentication and rule sets within your home lab. And identity management tends to be one of the most effective controls I've seen today, especially when you're trying to do things like zero trust. With an Azure Active Directory system, now I can do conditional accesses, which are behavioral based, they're time based. Some of it will give you a little bit of entity and user behavior analytics. Like, there's some machine learning and stuff behind the scenes. It's going to say, here's how you increase your security score. Here are the things that you're currently doing weak at. And it coaches you through implementing a more secure environment. And when I do consulting, this just blows my mind. I'll go in and I'll consult someone that's like, hey, we've just implemented Azure AD or Amazon AWS or Google, and I have to have a CASB. I have to have all these other solutions because we don't know if we're doing it right. Well, a CASB solution, I'm going to actually show a slide on that in a second, Cloud Access Security Broker. But each major player, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, have some pages, sometimes they're buried, sometimes they're not, that when you find them in the cloud, it actually coaches you through and walks you through, hey, I don't know if you realize you're doing this, but you really should not be doing this. Here's how to fix it. And you will gain so much experience securing and being able to be like, yep, I can do Azure security, because in my lab, I started off, my score was a whopping 12 out of 240, and now I've got it over 200. And you'll learn where things aren't practical because you'll break stuff. I do it to my enterprise, my actual business, all the time. And I learn from those mistakes. And then when I go to do client work, I don't make those mistakes because I've already made them in a safe or safer way. And that's what I want for you. So part of this is when I get into Azure Active Directory, at that point, I fall under a cloud tenant. So you think about this, like if I'm in Amazon or in any of the major clouds, you kind of have what's referred to as a tenant. It's your space in the cloud that you're responsible for. And there's MITRE ATT&CK, which we usually refer to as endpoints. Like these are your laptops, servers, and workstations. You're responsible for finding these adversary techniques. But there's also things like MITRE ATT&CK for the cloud, because what we're finding out is, well, adversaries go straight after your tenant rather than the assets in the tenant, because if they get access to the tenant, then they get access to everything anyway. And so this could be password spraying and brute forcing of how to log into like an Azure or a cloud, I'm sorry, not a cloud, AWS system. And so you need to be able to monitor your tenants. Now, Microsoft has some built-in things to do detection of attacks against it. But if we want to be a replicant of an enterprise environment, you also are responsible for monitoring that even beyond what comes for free. So like there's CloudTrail for Amazon. There's Azure Monitor plus some things with Sentinel that can be free. But here's where I could say Azure Monitor actually allows me to grab my tenant logs plus a bunch of other things if you want to enable it. Log on events, your subscriptions and pricing, how your resources are using CPU, disk I/O, things like that, and I can actually funnel them to say like an on-prem SIEM or a cloud-hosted SIEM. I would usually say an on-prem SIEM due to costs, but I'm bringing that data to your home lab, but I'm analyzing it to protect your cloud lab. And so this is exactly how I would do it in a corporate environment. So I usually would do something like Azure Monitor, which then logs to an event hub, and then I pull that into, say, I use Elastic Stack at home, and because I use it a lot commercially, but it could be do like a Splunk instance, maybe you're doing the Logarithm or QRater community editions. There's tons of ways you can play with this, and you're getting Microsoft Cloud Logs into your home lab. You're also going into things like Azure AD identity protection because it's included. So you have multi-factor, but is it actually enforced correctly? Are users logging in with legacy methods which bypass MFA? And it tells you, and when you click on it, it says, don't do this, here's how to fix it, and it walks you through it. Do you have a user, a test user, or yourself that is logging in from like new devices, or you're testing it through like a Tor node or a VPN that throws you in different countries? You're going to get flagged as a risky user. And you can actually configure it to dynamically change your access or to just cut it off. Same thing with sign-ons. If it's seen with different behaviors, and in Azure AD Identity Protection, this is a identity management platform that starts you to implement variable trust, zero trust implementations, which simply means rather than just always being allowed or blocked, I'm going to change your level of access based on the risk associated with the user. The cool thing here, though, is you don't have to calculate the risk. You can create custom things in here, but they actually do a really good job. This is one of the key things that I think Azure does a fantastic job of, is scoring and figuring out conditions on why someone's user activity is considered risky. And some of it's just like, I do a legacy logon. Well, you're considered not high risk, but you're considered a risky user because you're doing things that can easily get compromised. So it coaches you through it. It's a coaching system. It's like a little mentor system here. Part of those licenses will give you things like privileged identity management. That means instead of saying, yes, you are the domain admin or the equivalent in the cloud, the global admin, how about you're not at all, period. But wait a minute, I need to be able to make changes that require privileged rights, like the global admin rights. Okay, and? So I need global admin. No, you need global admin to do that, and you only need it for a short amount of time, and then you don't need global admin. I feel like we're saying the same thing, but we're not. No, we're not. Because what we really want to do in an enterprise environment is start to limit access to only what you need at the time you need it. You know, I have a domain admin access to some client environments, and I don't want it. I don't want it. And I literally, I'll reach out and be like, hey, you've given me domain admin access, and I really don't want this. Yeah, but how will you make the change? Like, well, you can give me that permission at the time I need it. And they're like, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to spend the labor. And it's like, no, because then if my account ever gets compromised, then I'll be that nasty vendor whose account got hacked and it's my fault. But really, it's because you won't take away my access. Take away my access, please. Well, on-prem, you can get identity management platforms that will do this for you. But in Azure and, again, a lot of the major cloud providers, it's already there. So PIM, Privileged Identity Management, has the ability where I can actually say, you know, on Friday at this time, I need this permission because I'm going to be adding a new app registration. I need to be setting up a new SAML provider for federation. I'm going to be changing the virtual machines because I'm going to spin off new ones, or, and the list goes on and on and on. And so I can put in requests, I can have other users, and I get this as a lab, so you're simulating this, approve it, and I don't have any of those admin capabilities until it's approved and the time that I requested it, that window is open. And I have to write down why, you know, what's my justification, and it's providing logs that I requested that permission and I use them. So again, just something that I often don't see clients even having, or if they did have it, they're not using, and you can learn how to use it and be the hero here. And of course, a CASB solution. This is something that even for your personal cloud applications, this would be really cool to implement. So again, all this is included. You can either do free trials, like a 30-day trial, or you could buy the Visual Studio subscription license and have it for the full year, however many years you keep renewing this. But part of that is the Microsoft Cloud App Security. It actually ranked pretty good on the Magic Quadrant if you follow that. Here's where I could say, yep, I use Dropbox. Here's API keys to my Dropbox account. Here's API keys to my Amazon account. Here's API keys to Google and, you know, Salesforce and basically all the major players. And what it's doing is it's going to hook, scan, and let you know where you have weaknesses, where you have strengths, and kind of give you this dashboard overall of how you're doing. Could be, you know, again, this is a Microsoft product, but it's a CASB solution, which means it'll say stuff like, hey, did you realize that somebody just downloaded hundreds of gigs of data from one of your cloud applications? I hope that was you. If not, you got a problem. This is high risk. Please look into it. Did you realize that one of your end users signed up for a cloud application, is using it, but it's not on your list of approved cloud applications? Oh, I didn't know that. And it'll help you find those. And it's actually kind of interesting too, because if you start sharing files, like from SharePoint or OneDrive or, you know, different applications, and you share them to external third parties, this actually will report on how they're using your data as well. So occasionally I'll share data with clients and I'll see risky behavior in cloud app security. And it's actually my client accessing data I'm sharing with them, and they're being flagged as risky users. And I have to go and look at and figure out why and if I care. And a lot of times I don't, but it's interesting that it's showing me poor security practices even of users that aren't directly my employees. And so it's integrating, and it lets me to put controls on a lot of these different cloud applications. So in here you can see OneDrive, Box, and so on and so forth. So that's included in these licenses. Now I don't want to just be, Microsoft this, Microsoft that. I use Microsoft, I use AWS, I use Google, I use a lot of the other SaaS applications out there. I'm trying to just cover in a short amount of time how I can help you get the biggest bang for your buck. That's what I'm trying to do. The software as a service capabilities, those components you get with 25 E5 licenses are huge. I probably didn't cover even half of the enterprise security controls you would get with those licenses. So, but I don't want to spend time just on Microsoft. With Amazon, if you want to try like commercial vendor boxes, like you want to rock the Palo Altos, the FortiGates, the F5s, a lot of the ways I'll test these, and Imperva, is on Amazon. I'll go and they've got a vendor agreement that lets me trial things. Maybe it might just be like 7 days. Sometimes it's 30 days. And often, like if I want to pit vendor products against each other, rather than engaging the vendors, which can be time consuming and they'll just call and call and call, I just go to Amazon. And it's so funny because like, okay, let me try Imperva's WAF versus like the F5 one, and I'll spin it up and start playing with it, and it doesn't cost me anything. The difference here is I don't get to keep it, and I like my labs, I really like to keep things as long as I can to simulate and modify over time. But for product evaluations, Amazon, I think, has one of the most generous systems for testing. And they fall this under free tier, which can be free trials or services. You want to play with Amazon S3 buckets? Go for it. You want to use their Amazon SNS service? You get 1 million requests before it costs you anything. And you want a free EC2 compute instance? Some of those are free for like a year, and then you start getting billed for them. So Amazon, kudos to them. I feel like their system for evaluation is fair beyond belief, but they still tend not to be permanent solutions. So if you're going to keep something longer than this, like I like to have a few virtual machines and containers, and I use them because I want to simulate like Amazon VPC flows, which is their ability to do software-defined networking to a flow-based log. Because I have a lot of my clients use Amazon. A lot of them use Microsoft, and so I have to be familiar with these products. But I don't have to spend a lot of money to do that. I can go for micro instances, which are really cheap. Containers, again, as long as I associate them with a micro instance, they're cheap. And then I can log it over to things like an S3 bucket, which also has a pretty fair pricing mechanism. With Amazon, your tenant is monitored using what they refer to as CloudTrail. CloudTrail will show like people are trying to generate new keys, they're trying to log on, you're spinning off new instances, you have keys that have been compromised on GitHub pages. Yeah, it actually goes fairly in depth. It can monitor VPC flow logs, and then it goes on and on. And by default, it's free. Like you turn it, well, you don't even turn it on, it's on. You have 90 days of activity. You can go longer, but that starts to cost money, and it's free. There is one thing for a lab I would consider enabling that's not free, and that's what's called the CloudTrail Insights. It's priced at basically on the logs it's analyzing and finding recommendations about. And if you're doing a very small Amazon instance, it'll cost like dollars. If you're doing a larger environment, you're doing like mass spin-ups, like some of the stuff that Ismael's getting to talk about, it might get more expensive, but it's still probably not going to get into like the hundreds of dollars. So if you want to do tenant level monitoring with Amazon, you stick with things like AWS CloudTrail. And then you can start turning on other things. You can log directly to CloudTrail. There's a thing called CloudWatch. That's what will let you get metrics of like how your virtual machines and containers are running. Also has a free tier which can log to CloudTrail or an S3 bucket, or it's a fairly diverse log set. I do have a webinar where I went into like Docker logging, and in that I covered cloud logging because they have what's called a stack driver. Google does the same thing, and so does Azure, where your web applications or your databases, when they run as containers, there's a cloud driver that actually will grab those logs and throw them in an easy bucket for you to grab. You know, for Amazon, I usually do something like an S3 bucket. It's easy to catch. So, okay, let me hit timeout for a second. I've been talking too long. Let's let Ismael have a stab at it, and I'll try to interrupt him as much as I can.
Yes, please. Yes. And, you know, I wasn't interrupting because, like, man, that's awesome. That's awesome. And first of all, thanks for clarifying the flying baby thing. I know you had a newborn recently, so I was worried for a second. It's like, what's happening with the baby, right? But no, that makes total sense now.
You can fly.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, you cover something that's really important, and it's these you know, SaaS platforms. Everything you can do with Azure, with AWS, and there's so much more, right? But that's kind of a good introduction to all the things you can start looking at. But still, I think many of us, we like to geek out, right? And we've been talking about building our own stuff in the basement. We want to, you know, play with infrastructure and configure the network and do things like that. So maybe many of you are wondering, well, is that it? You know, and it's great with SaaS because all you have to do is just, you know, clicking on a few things. You subscribe, put your credit card in, right? Details, and then you just click next, and awesome. You have like the GUI. You have actually access to all of these awesome features that you just showed. But what if you want to do more? When we talk about the Think Red, Act Blue, right, in the class, in Security 530, in some of these webinars, we talk about the importance of thinking as an attacker, and even like hands-on threat modeling with MITRE ATT&CK. And for that, you need to be able to rehearse. You need your labs. You need vulnerable applications. You need an environment where you can set up, you know, these attacks, the attacker tools, and then get those logs. And how can you do a lot of these things? Well, I don't know what you do, Justin, but typically we've been using a lot our laptops for this. And the problem is that doesn't scale, right? At some point you end up like, yeah, I don't have enough RAM. You install these VMs, you use them for a few days, and then the space keeps growing and growing, and then you can't use your laptop for anything else. Okay, so let's go to the basement, right? So you set up your rack and the awesome things we explained last time, until you realize you need more servers, and then you see the electricity bill at some point, and everything goes downhill quickly from there. So clearly we need more power, but that's going to come at a cost as well. But how can we do that? And I believe this kind of represents a fundamental change in how we see things, especially for many of us that may come from a more sysadmin type of background. So we're going to see things in a DevOps way now. And don't worry, we're going to see some code, okay? But even if you haven't ever coded before, we're going to explain what these things are, and hopefully it's going to make sense to you. We're going to demystify a lot of these things that could look like complex at first, maybe intimidating, but we're going to try to simplify this and show you how it is really easy to work with. So we're talking about infrastructure as code, and not only infrastructure, but also configuration as code. So what is this? Infrastructure as code is essentially using a language to automate the provision of these systems, right? We explain in a configuration file or in a text file how we're going to build certain infrastructure. And we say that we use a declarative approach. So in this declarative approach, we kind of let the the software that does infrastructure as a code to do absolutely everything for us. We just define some of the things we need in variables, and then we let the software to handle the VM or the containers, to install all the dependencies, and to manage a version. So that's great. And that allows you to spin up infrastructure really quick. The other approach is called imperative. What is imperative? It's kind of a new language, right? It's like a procedural approach, step-by-step approach. And this is essentially what we've been doing for many years. You have your own batch script, and you put in there all the different commands that you want to run, right? You SSH into the box, you run this batch script, and then you follow all those steps. Everything gets installed or configured. What are some of the tools that we have here? We have Ansible. You may have heard about this one, a big open source project sponsored by Red Hat. It's been around for a long, long time. It allows you to provision, but also to the configuration management, which is something that not all the tools allow you to do. And yes, this uses a declarative approach. It allows you to create playbooks. You write them in YAML files, and then you say this is what the infrastructure should look like. You can provision it, and you can also use this with Docker containers and Kubernetes. We also have tools like Puppet, like Chef, and others. But I want to focus today on one that maybe you have heard about, but you haven't maybe seen or you haven't played with before. And I really recommend that we look at this. It's Terraform. Terraform, it's considered more like an orchestrator. So it's designed to provision these infrastructure, these server instances, and it leaves the job of configuring them to other tools. So you could actually use Ansible and Terraform together. Terraform like an orchestrator to provision the systems, and maybe Ansible to do the configuration management. That's very very typical. Terraform uses this declarative style. So you say this is the desired end state. This is what I want to provision, and then the tool is going to do all of this automatically, right? We're going to demystify that. We're going to see how that works. We also have something on Windows, right? Since Justin's been talking about what we can get with some of our licenses, you also get, since PowerShell 4, DSC. This is desired state configuration. It's, again, a declarative language, and now it's included with Windows, and it allows you to not just to audit, but also to change settings across Windows and Linux servers. So that's very powerful, and you have it already, right? So let's talk a little bit more about Terraform. From all of these different tools, I chose to look at this one because, as I said before, it's very popular. First of all, it's an open source project. The company behind it is called HashiCorp, and it uses this declarative coding tool or declarative language. It's called HCL, right? You will see that as a HashiCorp configuration language. That's the language you use to describe what that end state looks like. And again, it's just a plain text file where you're going to use certain structure, certain language with variables to define what you want to do. But the power of this comes with the modules and the providers that this platform comes with. So together with a simple syntax and all of these contributions from the community, and there's like tens of thousands of contributors adding new content to this on a daily basis, this is what really makes Terraform so popular. Again, it's open source, it's platform agnostic, so you can run this on any cloud service provider, and not only with infrastructure as a code, but also with platform as a code, like Kubernetes, and software. Did I say platform as a code? Platform as a service, and SaaS as well. We're going to see some examples of that. Another kind of interesting characteristic of these is that many of these tools, infrastructure that do infrastructure as a code, create infrastructure that can be changed. And in this DevOps language, right, we talk about configuration drift, which means that we set up and provision this infrastructure, but then there is some changes. We change some configuration with this server, and then that drifts away from the original configuration, and now it becomes difficult to do troubleshooting or to diagnose when something doesn't doesn't work well. And you probably know what I'm talking about, right? Because we don't like to document stuff. And that's one of the reasons why this is awesome, because it provides the documentation of our infrastructure and all of these changes automatically. So that's great. So Terraform does something called immutable infrastructure, which means that to make a change to the environment, you have to actually replace that configuration with a new one. Right? The infrastructure has to be re-provisioned, and that allows you for rollbacks also if you want. So that's pretty awesome. And to illustrate what this declarative language is about, imagine we're talking about declarative versus imperative. The imperative, the procedural type of language that other tools use, it's more like using Google Maps. Imagine you have to go from point A to point B. You would check Google Maps, right, or any other GPS, and it would say, okay, so take exit 19, in 2 miles, turn left, straight ahead for 10 miles. That's like writing your batch script. You have to go line by line, saying exactly what you expect, right, what the tool has to do for you. When you use a declarative language like Terraform, and you want to go from point A to point B, it's like calling Uber, right? You call Uber, it's like, I want to go to point B. And you define your requirements, that's it. Then you don't care, everything is going to be done automatically for you. The driver takes care of the rest. In this case here, the driver is Terraform. We're going to tell Terraform what we want, and then we will see how Terraform takes care from there. So from a diagram perspective, and since we're running out of time, we're not going to be able to do whiteboarding here. I did the whiteboarding already for you. You can see this is done in about 3 phases. This is the workflow. And this is more like how you would do software. And since we're doing infrastructure as code, it's kind of the same thing, similar workflow. Phase 1, you create a file with code. It's the Terraform file. And you say, you know what, I want to create a VM. I want to create a Kubernetes platform. I want to create my VPC, my virtual private computing network, with the network settings for the VMs and Kubernetes. That goes into a file. You put the settings there, and then before you click or you execute all of that and it's built, there is a phase 2. Phase 2 is the plan phase, and this is awesome because now Terraform is going to compare our current state, right, like the real world, with our desired state. So we had that idea, right? That's point A. We want to go to point B, but at this point we don't have anything. All we have is a file describing an infrastructure that we want to build on the cloud. So now Terraform is going to compare. You have nothing. This is what you want. Okay, so let me plan for it, and we'll create an execution plan for you. It will tell you if there's any external dependencies or internal dependencies. So if something is going to break, it will not, you won't shoot yourself on the foot. The planner will tell you, it's like, hey, there's a problem here. This is not going to work. So you have an option to fix that before going into deployment phase. So let's assume that everything is fine. Planner says you're good to go. The third phase is actually the apply. Terraform is going to work with a cloud provider. It's going to work with your API tokens, spin up these resources, and it's going to output some variables. So for example, you will have the URLs for your dashboards to connect to your Kubernetes platform, or the URL of your application, for example. And the beautiful thing about this is that those modules that you see on top of that, on that image, those modules are provided by the community, provided by Terraform. So you don't have to explain how to start an instance, a droplet in DigitalOcean, for example. Terraform knows this because there's a module for that. And there's tons of providers, so you can use this language to build your own infrastructure and mix, let's say an AMI in AWS, or you could also use GitHub Teams. You can mix all of these different things, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service together as part of your own project, right? You want to set up a load balancer, you can say that. You can set up a new DNS record pointing to the load balancer. You can do that just by changing a simple line in your configuration file. So very briefly, and since we're running out of time, I'm just going to show you as you can tell on the slides, I'm going to share the slides with you. There's links to absolutely everything. So since we have at least here in the US, a long weekend ahead of us, this is a perfect opportunity for you to follow these instructions. So I'm going to give you some instructions, like a crash course on how to work with Terraform. And just with, I chose DigitalOcean because it's very simple and there's very little dependencies. Few steps, you can register there, create an account, a personal token that you will find under your account. You create some SSH keys, and we're going to build an Nginx server with Terraform. You're going to see how simple this is. It's as simple as defining a few variables. First variable, it's going to be your token, your DigitalOcean token. Then the private key and public key, the information from the keys that you have generated in the previous steps. And on the links you have there on the slides, you have the step-by-step, command by command, how to do all of this. And once you have that, that's the information on the provider. And Terraform knows already how to deal with DigitalOcean. So all you have to do is to tell Terraform, hey, here's my token. So you assign that token variable to your do token, right, which is a variable where we have defined, we have set here our token from our own account. So those values are going to be passed into Terraform, and then we can run with this. So from here, what we're going to be doing is to create another file, plain text file in this HCL language, to say, look, now create this droplet with this name, www1, use this image, use Ubuntu 18 on this region, this size. Obviously be careful with that because you know, the more CPU, the more RAM, the more you will have to pay for it. This type of connection, here's my private key, and then provision this. Notice the last block of code, provision a remote exec, that's another provider. And this tells Terraform, hey, once you provision this Ubuntu 18 and you log in as root via SSH, execute these commands. So what we're doing there is essentially installing Nginx. As simple as that. In the next one, we're going to finalize the installation. We're going to initialize our project. Right, this is when magic happens. It will read the configuration file. It will install the plugins for the provider for DigitalOcean. We will run Terraform plan with those variables. So the planner will now go through all the configuration and say, yep, I can do this for you. Then we apply, Terraform apply. Again, just pointing to the SSH keys and everything you have set up before. And then that infrastructure will be provisioned. You can check the status of your infrastructure with the last command, show Terraform state, and that will tell you, where you are in that desired state. It will say, well, you have your Nginx platform up and running. So at that point, in your output variables, you will have the URL, right, the IP for your Nginx instance. All you have to do is just connect to that, and you will see you have your server up and running. So hopefully we have demystified this a little bit, right? It's not that hard. You don't have to know a lot of coding, right? It's just like a language to describe things, what you want, and then this software, Terraform, takes care of everything. Now let's take this to our own space, right? What can we do with this? So here's your projects for the next few weeks. Try Detection Lab by Chris Long. This is a Defender's Dream Lab. So this is perfect for what we are doing in cybersecurity right now, trying to emulate attacks, trying to see if you have enough visibility, enough detection, doing your threat modeling with MITRE attack techniques. This comes with a lot of stuff. As you can see, Microsoft ATA, we have a Splunk as well, we have auditing, we have Windows Event Forwarding, we have Sysmon, we have a lot of cool things. So all you have to do is to spin up this instance by using the instructions you're going to find here, and you can provision all of this lab, right, with AVPC. You have your own subnet, you have your domain controllers, you have everything already pre-provisioned for you, up and running in less than 30 minutes. So if you want to know how to do that, just follow this link and follow those instructions. That's pretty awesome. Doesn't get any better than that. Oops, let me go to the previous one. Finally, another project that has been updated recently as of September last year, CyberRange 2. So if you didn't have enough, this will spin up to 30-something instances, AMIs, in the AWS cloud. So this is your ultimate research lab, right? Enterprise lab. And you have a lot of things here. You have a segment for penetration testers, right? So you can see you have Kali Linux, Commando, and a bunch of other things. You have also targets, vulnerable systems you can play with. You have a malware research sandpit as well that it's isolated so you can run your malware analysis tools, honeypots, and even detection lab, the one we just saw from Chris Long, it's included here. So if you want to use Terraform for this, you can also do that. You can spin up these, all of these AMIs, all of these awesome enterprise lab with Terraform. There is a caveat here is that you have to use a registration form, and this is because of the Windows licensing. So the author wants you to just indicate what's the AWS ID you're going to be using, and then he will give you access to all of these 30-something instances of all of these systems. So that's, it doesn't get any better than that. However, the final consideration here, this can haunt you. This can haunt you at night, right? Why? Because it can get expensive. For that CyberRange 2 with over 30-something machines, you're talking about $1 per hour, which could be okay, especially if you manage to get your employer to sponsor you for this. And we're going to talk more, right, Justin, in the next one about how to do that.
$1 per hour per AMI, though, so it's like $30+ an hour.
Yeah, but so you just put your employer's credit card, it's going to be fine. No, am I saying this? Am I being recorded? No, don't do that, right? And yeah, so this can get expensive real quick, but hopefully, we're giving you a lot of different options, things that you can start playing with. My recommendation is get these slides. We're going to share them. We're going to go on Twitter and share a lot of the links we just shared with you, these tools. So follow us there and spend some time trying to spin some of these labs up. And I think this is a skill that now we cannot afford just not to have. I think in Security 530, right, we talked, Justin, about how automation is an architectural choice.
Yep.
And as engineers, as architects, even as analysts, you need to know, at least coding to be able to implement all of these things. So that's it for me. Justin, any other final words?
Yeah. Ismael, do you have the short link for the mentor session that we're having on Friday? So Friday, we're having a mentor session on how much cloud do you need to know to be successful in InfoSec. It'll look kind of like this. But I believe, Ismael, you're the one that has the short URL, and I don't remember what it is. So if you want to join us Friday at 9, we're going to kind of extend this cloud discussion a little bit because we've had requests from folks over social media. So this is just us kind of talking a little bit more in depth, but from a mentor role among everybody. It'll be more of a Q&A, open discussion. So
I'm going to share the link on Twitter, right? So right now,
perfect.
How about that?
Okay. Carol, I don't know if we have time for questions. I know we're over 3 minutes, but if we have time, I'm available. If not, then totally understand.
Yeah, we have some time. A bunch of questions are coming in about the cost of the Visual Studio. Some people say only the yearly subscription includes what you're talking about.
Yes, that is. The E5 licenses, that is a true statement. You have to do an annual subscription, but you don't have to do the annual perpetual. I'll see if I can bring that up real quick. It is by subscription. I don't think you have to do this perpetual license. I think you can actually get this as an annual where you don't keep the licenses, and it's the 540.
Okay. Let's see. It says, all right, that's not a question. Hang on one second. Will this lab environment allow me to test DLP in Microsoft?
Yes. Hard yes. Yes, plus all the sophisticated controls even when guests are accessing data.
All right, thanks. Any quick wins or suggestions on what ticks in the security boxes break things for an average client?
You usually can't just go in and disable legacy auth, even though that's one of the #1 recommendations. And also, if you get too heavy-handed with multi-factor, that will also start breaking things. So it's usually authentication components. There's also things about disabling, like if you do the endpoint controls, if you start turning off like older versions of NTLM and stuff like that, you can break things. They've done a fairly decent job, though, of warning you, hey, make sure you've done XYZ before you apply this. That being said, make sure you do it in a lab. You will break things.
All right, thanks. We have been scripting a lot of our attacks in 3 levels: benign to test threat hunting tools, validated vulnerabilities with evidence artifact, resource capture and/or control. Would you recommend any tools and/or solutions that could help us test our client's cloud without us recreating the wheel?
I mean, Ishmael, feel free to throw your spin on this, but I lean more towards things like Atomic Red and other like purple team testing tools, Caldera. The downside, though, is integrating it with your own custom reporting is going to require scripting anyway, but at least you're not reinventing all those tests.
Yeah, no, there's a bunch of tools out there, and we actually did a webinar on that, right? I think like the Think Red, Act Blue thing, where we talked about many of these. There's a whole new category actually from Gartner called Breach and Attack Simulation Tools, BAS. And yeah, some of those that you mentioned, Red Canary has an awesome tool for that. And there's, even now commercial tools coming up with this. My thing is, you want to have a mix of automation. Caldera, for example, it's great for that too, and like manual purple teaming, because you cannot automate a human, right? You cannot substitute a human brain. So automation goes a long way to actually create content for blue teaming and incorporating that into your ongoing processes, making sure you refine your detections. But still, there's no substitution for doing a manual, human-driven purple teaming exercise every now and then. So I would actually combine both to do that validation.
All right, thanks. Someone wants to know, when is the presentation for the cloud log tracking?
For the cloud, where is the presentation for the cloud log what?
Tracking. Is that a webcast you already did, or is that something that's upcoming?
Oh, I've done, so my Sec 555 class, Sim with Tactical Analytics, I do lots and lots of webcasts. I've covered multiple cloud things, especially like I think in this one I was talking about like Docker and Kubernetes style logging in the cloud. That you can find in the SANS archive. You also can find it at this GitHub link. I have a GitHub repo called Presentations. I'll probably upload the one we have that we give today as well. So if you're just wanting like slide decks, they're in this presentations folder. Like cloud logging and security, Contain Thyself is the one specific to containers. I would recommend the SANS archive though, because like the flying baby slide probably wouldn't have made sense if you didn't hear me walk through it. So just FYI.
All right, well, at this point, we are out of time. People can submit questions to q@sans.org. Do you guys have any way that people could reach you, or?
Social media, the @SecurityMapper and About Security. Good way, just tweet us directly, and we'd be glad to answer questions.
And we put on the chat the link to the mentor session, thinkredactblue.com/mentor. Yep, that's the one.
All right, well, thank you so much, Ismael and Justin, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care And we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.